When we left off last time, we were right here where we had a form that recorded the state or updated the state in React. So we can update this input field, and as we update it, you can see it updates our state here. Now what we want to do is be able to add multiple people into our state, and to do that, we're going to basically be copying this this set of fields multiple times. Now there's two ways we could do this. One is we could just copy and paste and add a whole bunch of different sets of these and just hope that we guess the maximum amount of people someone's going to have in their family. Or we could make it to where we provide one, but also a way for the person filling it out to add a second field. So in this case, we would have this one, maybe a button down here that says add person, and a second set would show up, and then another add person thing, and so on and so forth. So we could add as many, or the person filling out the form could add as many people as they needed to their household before submitting. That's the way we're going to go. Copy and pasting probably isn't the best option, and React makes it pretty easy to do this. So let's do it with the programmatic way. Now, before we do that, one of the things we're going to need to do is take all this set of person fields and extract it into something we can reuse over and over. So let's do that first of all. So I'm going to write the code I want to see first, and then we'll make it work. So I'd like to see something like person fields component. And for now, we don't need any props. So for those person fields, I'm going to cut all these. So those are gone. And now I'm going to make that person fields component here. Again, we're not going to pass any props to it, and we're going to return everything we just pulled out of our form. Save that. I'm missing a closing JSX. Oh, I know what I'm doing. So in this particular case, we have one div field and here, and then one div field here, and they're both considered top level. React, when you return a component or return the render, it requires you to have one top level parent. So React provides a way in these situations to do something like this with React fragment. So we're going to wrap all this in a React fragment tag, and we're going to close out the fragment. There we go. That's saved successfully. So now let's take a look at our form here, and we have nothing. That's because of all this. We didn't bring the state along with the person field. So let's pull out all that and put that with the person fields, and now we have it working again. So in this case, we have the app, then the form, and then person fields. You notice the form no longer has any state, and we're going to change that here in a minute. But person field now has the state. So we just make sure that still works. Jeffrey, and I am a child, an adult. Yes, so that's all still working. Perfect. So now we've extracted that person fields. If we wanted to, we could just copy and paste and add. Now we have 3 person fields, and here they are. That's again something we could do, but in this case we don't want to do that. We want to do it programmatically. Let me save that. So how are we going to do that programmatically? Well, again, I'm going to use some state. For this particular thing, I'm going to have a state of like an array of people that we're going to have on the form. So let's do const, and I'm going to call it people, and then set people equals use state. And in this case, we're just going to be just one person. Well, let's do no people. Show what happens. And so for each person in the people, so let's map over all the people. And our function that we're going to provide is for every person in the people array, we're going to render a person fields component. And in this case, everything in an array needs a specific key. So map provides a way to get a unique identifier for each. So let's just do that. Okay, so now all of them have a unique key. So for every person we have in our people array, we're going to render a person fields. Now, what do you think is going to show up? We initialized our state with an empty array for people. So if we go back to our form, we've got no fields. So in this case, we actually need to set up an initial person in our people array. And if you'll notice here, we have the attributes we want to start with for a person. So why don't we extract that and say that's going to be an empty person. And I'm just going to yank all this stuff out, put that here, and again, we'll let prettier make it look nice for me in a minute. And so in our state here for the person fields, we're instead of saying all that, we're just going to use that empty person thing we just defined. And then in our use state here, we're going to add empty person. Okay, so now when I load it up, excuse me, we can see that we have one field here, one set of fields. Perfect, because we have one person and he's an empty person. Now, let's take this a step further. Let's make a button that will, when we click it, add another person to our array. So here we're going to say, how about a button? The label is add person. And yeah, don't think that's what I wanted. So instead of the label, let's just say add person out here. Button. Save that. Now we have our add person button. When we click it, nothing happens. So we need to add an on-click handler. So say on-click equals, and again, we're going to have an event. In this case, we don't really care about the event. So we're going to have, we're not going to care about the arguments that are passed into the function here. And we want to add a new empty person to our people array. So we're going to set people, which will update our state. And inside set people, what we want to do is return an array, and we're going to spread out the people we currently have in the array, but then pop in another extra empty person at the end. So let's see what that does. So if I add a person, boom, we get more people. Yay. That's what we wanted on that. So that works. Let me add an extra space there just to make it clear. So now we can update the people in our array. So form has a state now, and it's just an array of people. And if I add a person, now we've got two people, and they've got empty strings, and of course a false for a child as its initial state. Perfect. Now, as we update each person field, so let's say this is now Jeffrey, you'll notice that it doesn't update our state on the form. Our person field state has updated, but our form state hasn't updated. So it's still an empty string on both of these. So we need to some way for our person fields component to talk back up to the form component, let it know that this particular person has been updated. So we can do that with like our own on-change handler. On our person fields, let's say, actually, let's just do it in the person. Let's do it up here. So on change. Let me go back on change. Let's just take the argument that we're going to be getting. Let's call it a person. No, let's do attributes, because that's what we eventually want to pass through. And then we're just going to console log them out just to make sure we've got everything hooked up correctly down below. We save that, formats it. You'll notice that as I'm changing here, nothing's actually coming through the thing, because we're not ever calling the on-change handler in our person fields component. On some of these, we put in an on-change, like in the input, and it automatically did it. But that's because the input field already has a callback for the on-change. It's built in. In this case, person field is something we created, and we're not doing anything with on-change. We don't really care about changes at this point. But now we do, and so let's do that. So on our person fields, we're going to be passing in as props an on-change handler. So let's destructure that, and now we have the on-change. We can call that anytime we want. And we're going to be using an effect from the hooks, from the new React hooks. So use effect. What we want to do is just call onChange with the attributes. And that's going to be our onChange. Well, we want that to change anytime attributes changes. We want that to be called anytime attributes changes. So use effect, you provide it in the first argument here. You provided a function to call anytime the effect is called. And the effect is called every time whatever you put in here changes. So in this case, we want this to be called anytime attributes changes. And when attributes changes, we go into this function here and we call our onChange handler, which we passed to person fields, with the new value of attributes. So let me save that, and let's see if we got everything hooked up correctly. So if I update one of these fields here, we should see the attributes show up down here in the log. You can see actually that we already have something logged out. That's because useEffect calls on the first render and whenever this changes. So we did get the first render. That's not that big a deal at this point. That's not going to mess with our implementation. So let me call this, so every time I type something, we can see that our attributes are getting passed back up to the form component, just how we wanted. Now, we need to update on the person fields. Anytime the change happens, we don't want to just console it. We want to console log it. We want to actually update the attributes of the person that this was called on. Let me change that out to make it a little bit easier. We can call multiple lines here. So how are we going to do that? Well, we already have a set people function here from our state, from useState, where we can update the people in our people state. So let's use that. So set people. In this case, we have an issue because we don't know exactly which person this is, but we kind of do. If you remember back when we mapped over this, we mapped over every person, but provided it the index of the array. So on the first call, this I will be 0, and that's the zeroth position in the array, the first actual person in the people array. But every time it goes through, if we have more than that, it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Now there are some functions in JavaScript that allow you to break up an array based on their indexes. And so we're going to be using the slice function. And let me actually go over here. Let's look in the documentation for slice over here. So here's array prototype slice. So this is the documentation for slice. You can see here that if we slice 2 from animals, then it comes back camel, duck, elephant. So it goes into the index, the second index, or the 2 index of the array, and only does from 2 to the end. So in this case, we lose ant and bison because those were the first 2. That was position 0 and position 1. Now, you can also provide it a second argument, and that shows where to end the slice. We want to start at index 2, but we want to end it at index 4, or before index 4 in this case. So we drop off ant and bison, but we start with camel, and then we go to duck, which is index 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, and then we drop off elephant. So that's kind of what we're going to use. We're going to slice off the first few of the people and return them as they already are. So we can say people slice. Actually, since this is going to be return array, we want to spread those out. So return people slice from 0 to the index position. So if the index position is 1, then it'll return 0. And then we want to provide the attributes that we just got. So we pass in the attributes here for this person. So this person is going to be updated with the fresh version of the attributes. And then we want to make sure we include the rest of the attributes. So we want to do I plus 1 and spread out those. And that goes to the end of the array. All right, so let's just make sure that works. Let's test that. Let me do that. And go back to our thing. And we actually have an error here. So people map is not a function. I just realized one thing I forgot to do is make sure that this is returning an array. So make sure that all these people are wrapped in the new array. So let's go back to our form here. So we have our form. We can see in our form we have a state that has an array of people. So let's see what happens if we update the person. There we go. So now our form knows about the different people. So what if we add another person? Well, we get a new object here of the person attributes, and let's update this. So Jenny. All right. So it updates the correct one. Let's add another person just to make sure. Let's call him Bill. So we have Bill here in index 2. But let's go back and change Jane just to make sure nothing else broke. Okay, so the second one is getting the correct updates. Perfect. So that works. Now this looks a little ugly. It's not going to look great even by the time we're finished, but we can split it up a little bit by adding maybe a person, like a title or a heading or something. So let's do that. We already know the number of the person because we have this index. So we can say, let's add a heading field here, person I plus 1. Because remember, again, we're going to have to add a React fragment. But if you remember, the indexing of arrays start at 0. So person 0 is not going to make much sense to someone visiting your church unless they are themselves a programmer. So let's wrap that in a fragment because you can only return one thing. And now we can see person 1, add that second one, person 2. We do have an issue here because of this. Each child in the list should have a unique key prop. In this case, since we're rendering a React fragment multiple times, we need that to have a key. And we'll make that I. In this case, we no longer need the key on the person fields because the React fragment's the thing that's rendered multiple times. Now this is getting a little big, so I'm going to reduce my font size just a little bit so we can see more than 2 people on the field on the screen at once. So now we have the ability to split out these and update their states. Perfect. Now, I think we're getting to a point where we want to submit the form and provide the data to our backend, which we'll build next. But let's first of all build that button, which is going to be the easy part. So button, and then for that, we're just going to say submit. Close out the button. Take a look, see what that looks like. Yeah, we have it there. Perfect. And what are we going to do when we click it? Well, for now, let's call a new function. How about handle submit? We're going to need this in there. Actually, we don't need this because we're using a function component. So we need to provide the handle submit function here equals, and we're going to take no props or no arguments. And in this case, let's just console log out clicked, just so we know that that is hooked up correctly. So we hit submit and we get the clicked in the log. Perfect. Now what we really want to do is actually build up a JSON payload that we can send to our backend so that it knows how to send it on to people. Now, if you remember, in a previous video, we looked at the documentation and said that things need to be wrapped in an object that looks like this, so data type. Now, we don't know all the data yet because we're going to allow our backend to do that, but we do know the attributes of each of the people that we have in our state. So we can build out this part of the attributes, which was what we're going to do here. So, and send that to the backend. So what we can do is for all our people in our state, we're going to map over it. And we're going to, let's just store this. How about people to submit? Let's just call it payload. And we'll change that here in a little bit. But for now, let's just call it payload so we can console log it to see what we get. And we're going to map over each of our people. And so for each person, we're going to have an attributes key. And if you notice we need to do the pass in the person each time. There we go. And let's do this. Return attributes. Let's just return something here so we can get the formatting down. There we go. And we'll obviously update this in a second. But I want to show you something else. In the documentation for people, we're going to be using the latest version. Go to person. You'll notice that here's the attributes. And in JavaScript, we typically do Pascal case. So start with a lowercase letter, and then when there's a new word, we typically uppercase it. So as we've been updating our attributes, we store it in the Pascal case. So first and then name, the capital N. Now the API expects it with an underscore. So we need to convert that. So let's just do that conversion here. Since we know we're going to need it in the back end, let's do that conversion here. So first underscore name is going to be our person first name with the Pascal case. And we're going to keep doing that for each of the attributes. Last name. We have gender, person gender. And we have child, and that's person.child. Now for each of these of the people in the people array, each person in the people array, we're going to return this attributes object. So I'm going to save that. But first, actually, let's console log out our payload. I'd like to tag it here real quick. Payload. And this will we'll be sending to our backend. So let's say Jane Doe. You know what? Let me undo this console log every time we have a change. All right. We have Jane Doe. How about Jame? Female. And then we're going to add a second person. That didn't update. Aha. Do you see what's happening here? So when we update our state here with the radio, it undoes the one from the other person. That's because if you go down here, if we go to our adult child, the ID is just adult or child. We need to know which particular adult or child this is being used on. Since it's all the same ID, it's just going to pick one of the ones from the HTML and update that one. That's not going to work for us. So we're going to need some way to know which particular person we're using here. So we can say, let's pass in like a field ID. Let's just do ID. So this is the ID of the person field. And we already have a unique identifier with the index here. So we'll just make this ID equals the identifier or the index from the people map. So with that, we notice that we have a lot of these things here. So our label for this input is first name, but the label for this input is first name, and the label for this input is just first name. So every time if I click down here on first name, you notice here this highlighted. If I click down here on last name, you'll notice that now this is highlighted. Same with this. They all will go to the first HTML thing. So we need to make those unique as well. So to do that, let's do a little bit of JavaScript here. And we need to wrap these in curly braces. So first name, and then let's just do a dash ID. And that'll append the ID to the field. And actually, let's just not do a dash. Let's just do first name ID. We need to do the same thing on the ID. So change this ID, and then change these to close that out. The same thing on the last name. So let's just place that, add that, and then make sure we bring in the ID. And the same thing down here in the ID. I know this is great watching, but it's something we need to go through as a developer, so let's just get it over with and do it. Hopefully it's not too horrible watching me do this. ID. And then same thing for here. Just do it this way. Oh, I forgot the ID there. And then here, same thing. Same for here. You know what? I'm just going to copy and paste this one. So you get out of there. This needs to be child with the ID. And this needs to use that ID. Thankfully, this is the last one. Save that, no errors. Now, let's take a look at the actual HTML it came up with here. So first name, let's right click here, inspect this. We can see the 4 is first name 0, and we also have first name 0 here. So let's add another person. This should be first name 1. Again, it doesn't really line up with the number here because we're using the index from the JavaScript. Yeah, first name 1, first name 1. Perfect. So now if I add Jane here and then Billy here, if I click on this first name, this one highlights. If I click on this first name, this one highlights. So they are now separated, which is what we need, which is going to be nice. So now we should be able to, no, we're not able to. And why is that? Oh, because the name also needs to be updated. So not only the ID on the radios, but also the name needs to be unique. Copy that, paste that. There we go. So add a person. Now they each have their own adult child radios. Perfect. So sorry for that little detour. Again, this is kind of live, so hope you don't mind when I make a mistake or two that we need to fix. All right, so now what we were going to do is submit the form. So let's go ahead and submit a form here. So we have Jane Doe, that is a female, adult, and John Doe, and that is a male, adult, and let's also add Billy Doe. He's a male child, just to make sure we're getting all the different things. So when we submit, we should see something in the console here. So we have our clicked, and then we have our payload here. So we have an array of 3 people. 3 objects. Let's make sure they're people. Yes, we have our first name, Jane Doe, female, and not a child. Same thing here with John Doe, and same thing here with Billy Doe. Perfect. So now we're able to submit multiple people with the submit button. Now, obviously, we need to do something more than just log it out in the console. We need to actually handle it on a back end, and that's what we're going to cover next. We're going to create a Sinatra app with Ruby that takes this payload and creates each of these people and then creates a household for them and puts them in the household. And of course, to do that, we're going to need to call the API, the Planning Center API. And to do that, we're going to need to register an application so that we have a token and a secret that we can use to make those calls. So we're going to go over making those secrets here in a minute. But hopefully this is a good overview of how we can make each person unique and how we can submit it to a submit button or a submit handler through a submit button.